This mobile phone tracing app is being trialled on the Isle of Wight, and basically the idea is that you use Bluetooth technology, and people volunteer to take the app, put it on their phone, and then it's supposed to help us out this lockdown. Can you explain to those of us who perhaps are not very tech savvy how it actually works?
Well, the reason they use Bluetooth is that Bluetooth is not centralised. All Bluetooth knows is which devices also running Bluetooth are near you at any one moment. So the idea is that you have the app on your phone, someone else has the app on their phone, and using Bluetooth, which is just a very local form of communication, your phones send coded messages to each other. So neither message will identify which phone it is, but you get a unique code. I saw somebody describe it as you might exchange random names of fish. So my phone might tweet pilchards, not tweet Bluetooth pilchards to your phone. Your phone might send sardines back to mine. We don't know who each other is, but the phones will store those random strings of letters and numbers in the phone. So later on, you could go back and say, well, we know that my phone was near your phone because my sent folder includes the word pilchards and your received folder also includes the word pilchards. So we could trace back and find out which phones have been near which other phones. That's the clever technical part of it. Now, the centralised, decentralised thing is interesting because you can do this two ways. You can either say, all of these codes will go into one central database. And then if I turn out to be infectious, then all my codes can be dug up and the central database can contact you and anybody else who has a code that matches my codes and say, oh, you were near Timandra, she was infectious, you should go and get tested or you should stay indoors, whatever the system is. But it's equally possible to do that inside the phones. So the only time my codes ever get uploaded to a database is when I get a diagnosis, when I know I'm infectious. And your phone can check against that database without ever uploading your codes. So your phone can say to you, oh, watch out, you were near somebody who was infectious, you don't know who or when even, but you should go and get tested. But nobody in the central database will ever know that it was you or that even that you were near me.
And I can understand why that would be appealing to people who are concerned about, big data. We've had all these big issues about the big tech companies basically using our data and selling it on. I mean, I think a lot of us just frankly give it into that at this point. And a lot of people, I think certainly including me, would say at this point, I'm willing to give up quite a lot of my privacy to give up my privacy of sitting in me darned home all day, every day, for weeks and months on end. It's a bit of a trade-off. The idea, of course, this would be voluntary, so everyone doesn't have to do it. Of course, not everyone has got a smartphone, but most people who will be out and about and who need to get back to work will. But in terms of how this data would be used, it would still be anonymised, would it? They would just a message, even if it was centralised, and a message came onto my phone to say, "Hi, Julia, you've been out and about, and in the last week you've been within 2 meters of somebody who now has tested positive for COVID-19. You need to get yourself checked and stay in isolation until you have." Would sort of a real person, would a centralised computer know it was me?
Well, this is the question. Certainly it would never say to you that it was me that had infected you. It would never say, watch out, you were near Timandra and she was infectious. That bit of it would be anonymised. And at the moment, they're saying that your end would also be anonymous. So nobody in the central database would necessarily know it was you. They would just know it was your phone. But there is some doubt about whether it will always stay that way. Because, for example, if they decided that the tracking and tracing wasn't working quite well enough and we needed to enforce that people who might have been infected should stay at home, they might decide it was worth de-anonymising it because when you download the app, it would be perfectly possible to keep a record of who has downloaded it and match up the codes to the person. So it's always possible to de-anonymise these things, either for a hacker, although I have to say here that's quite unlikely because they've got the national cybersecurity people on the case of keeping it secure and they're pretty good, or just that the people running the app would decide it's worth actually identifying people and maybe being able to contact you and say, Julie, you must not leave your house for 2 weeks, and in fact we're going to monitor your mobile phone so we'll know if you have.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the concern. I suppose we could just have it, they have all the information, but they have to discard it after 2 weeks. Would we trust that they would? Or that, at the end of this whole pandemic, they discard it. But governments don't tend to have a very good record of giving up access to our lives, do they? So that will be a concern for a lot of people. But I suppose there's also an argument that we do need to have the government know who's getting the virus and who they've been in contact with, because we need to know where the patterns of an outbreak are so that we can keep below that R number of 1. I mean, fundamentally, this isn't just about protecting our privacy. This is about keeping people alive. Do you think that genuinely, and you say a member of the Royal Statistical Society working group on data ethics, do you think that the need to keep the country alive is going to trump people's privacy concerns overall?
Well, that's the thing. I think everybody accepts that we're in an exceptional time. I mean, the very fact that Google and Apple have clubbed together to work on something that protects our privacy, I mean, that's a pretty unprecedented development, isn't it? So I think most of us accept that there are unprecedented times and that we accept things that would not normally be acceptable. I think what our government is failing to do, which a lot of other governments have done, is really be clear about where the limits of that are. I mean, you mentioned South Korea earlier. South Korea have what we would consider an intrusive system in some ways of tracking and tracing. They can use not just your mobile phone data, they can use things like your credit card data or CCTV footage to really reconstruct where you've been. But they also have a law that very explicitly was in place after their last pandemic that said, in the event of a pandemic, we can use all this data, but it's only for the purposes of this tracing. It will be destroyed after a certain time and so on. In Australia, where they're using a very similar app to the one that's proposed here, that's being tested on the Isle of Wight, they also have a law in place which, again, very severely limits what else can be done with that data, that it has to be destroyed at the end of the pandemic, that it's only kept for 21 days, because after 21 days,
it's not much use anyway.
In danger of exactly.
Yeah.
So
that would, I think, would assuage a lot of people's fears. But we would need sort of more than 60% of the public to sign up to this. Look, I'll sign up to it tomorrow. I'll sign up to it yesterday if it can get us out of our homes. Timandra Harkness, thank you so much for a really, really helpful explanation. I hope that's been useful to my Talk Radio listeners. We're going to get that full explanation of how it all works out on our Twitter feed and on YouTube as well, so people can come back to that. Timandra Harkness is a author of Big Data Does Size Matter?